We're joined now by someone who has spent nearly his entire life chasing the truth behind one of America's most defining and most covered up moments, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Donald Jeffries is a veteran researcher, author, and independent thinker who began his journey in the mid-1970s as a teenage volunteer for the legendary JFK investigator Mark Lane. And since then, he's spent decades exposing the lies we're told and the truths we're never meant to see. He's the author of 10 best-selling books, including Hidden History, Survival of the Richest, and American Memory Hole, How the Court Historians Promote Disinformation. We're going to dig into the latest JFK file release, what's really new, what's still being kept from us, and why 60 years later does this matter more than ever. Don, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be with you, Kim. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so the latest March 2025 JFK file drop, 80,000 pages. I want to get this was hyped up as full disclosure, especially by the Trump administration, but now we're hearing thousands of documents are still missing. Curious, what is your take on this release? Did we actually learn anything new, or is this just another game?
Well, I think especially for people like me, where these things may mean more to someone like me rather than the average person who isn't obsessed with this stuff. But I think it reinforced what we already knew. I think we now have concrete. We already had proof in my eyes that Oswald was connected to the CIA, but now we know from these files that James J. Angleton. The files go deeply into James J. Angleton, who was a big honcho in the CIA, and interestingly enough, he was very connected to the Mossad in Israel. He has a monument to him in Israel. That's how connected he was. And that was one of the main reasons why Israel popped up so much in these documents. But we know that Angleton personally recruited Lee Harvey Oswald in the Marines at age 20 and into the CIA. So there's and as Jefferson Morley has pointed out, there was a 198-page file on Angleton's deaths, on Lee Harvey Oswald, the week before the assassination. So he had been monitoring him all those 4 years. And that's very crucial because Angleton was, very high up in the CIA. This wasn't any kind of accidental thing. When you combine with everything else we know, we had testimony back to the House Select Committee from officers in the CIA that talked about Oswald being so obviously affiliated with the agency that they used to joke about it with each other at cocktail parties. Mm-hmm. So it's only the population that doesn't seem to recognize this, and the lone nutters that are hanging on to it. But I think that was really the most extraordinary thing. We also had concrete proof, I think, because these documents weren't redacted, really hardly at all. And I've looked at these documents for so many years, and you're used to being frustrated by seeing all the black marks, and you can't tell what the names are half the time. Tulsi Gabbard, credit to her, she did a really good job of making sure these were really almost not redacted at all. However, because they weren't redacted at all, they had really disclosed some documents that I don't know why they were ever classified to begin with, and they were basically staff documents for the House Select Committee that had the Social Security numbers of kind of low-level staffers. Why they didn't redact the Social Security numbers now, I don't know. But I mean, that's these things are so planned that could have been done on purpose so that critics, and they did, could jump on that. This is a breach of security. These people are private citizens and they shouldn't, and it's true. Mm-hmm. They shouldn't. But so unfortunately, that was the bad part of it. But the good part of nothing was redacted. And we also learned, for instance, again, Israel kept popping up here over and over again. And there's an FBI memo in this document drop that had been released before. True, it had been released before, but at the bottom of it is written a notation that the CIA is fine with everything being released except for the bracketed items. Now, the bracketed items have been redacted this time, and we can see that every bracketed item has to do with Israel. So I don't know what the instant explanation is for why would the CIA be so concerned with Israel. Angleton is in the middle of this. He was the CIA's connection to Israel and the Mossad. So, I'm not going to go out and say that I think CIA was Israel was the main conspirator, the main trigger behind the assassination, but I think this shows that there was some kind of connection there. So I think that's very important. And the other big document that we got was a document acknowledging that Jim Garrison, I wish Jim Garrison was still around, had documentation. Now, we've never seen the documentation, but this FBI memo refers to it as Garrison having documentation that Lee Harvey Oswald used Jack Ruby for a job reference in the summer of 1963. So the concrete proof they knew each other, if you needed any other proof. So I think those are the most fascinating aspects. We can go into a couple other things, too, that are just kind of interesting. But I think those things are very telling, and it reinforces what we already know. But I don't know what kind of smoking gun people are expecting.
So with James Angleton, was he somebody? I mean, you've been researching the JFK files forever. So has his name, was this a prominent name previously before this file dump? Was he somebody that people were looking at, thinking he was involved in some way? Or did this latest dump say, oh no, this person who we just thought was kind of like a, like a whatever is now central?
No, in my mind he was, because again, I knew of just he kind of represented everything you think you know about the CIA being sinister or shadowy. He was a very strange character. His middle name was Jesus. I guess supposedly.
I think they pronounced it Jesus.
Yeah, I think so. But I guess he had some Hispanic. I don't know. Maybe he had some kind of Hispanic background. He would have to have a middle name like that.
I actually, I read about him, and I don't think he does. I think it was a. Let me actually just look that up real quick. He was actually from my hometown of Boise, Idaho, which is where I'm from. Yeah, and his father. Okay, I guess he's the eldest of four, and his parents met in Arizona. His father was a U.S. Army officer. Carmen Moreno was born in Mexico, but was already a naturalized American citizen before she married him. Okay, so yeah, I guess he has some. His mom.
I guess that.
Yeah,
I guess that.
Okay.
So, but it's still just kind of a bit odd to see that listed all the time. But yeah, I had read a lot about him, and I always thought it was strange that prominent researchers tend to not mention him that often. They tend to mention David Atlee Phillips, who was the station chief in Mexico City, and I think he was, obviously involved in some way. And Jeff Morley likes to talk about George Ioannidis. These were officers that certainly probably played some kind of role, but Angleton was way higher up than any of them. And if we can now show that he's the one who recruited Oswald into the CIA and had a 198-page file on his desk the week before the assassination and had been monitoring him for the 4 years since he recruited him, to me, I think it's pretty obvious that whatever involvement the CIA had, and they obviously had significant involvement, I think Angleton is the one to look at. I would stop looking at David Atlee Phillips and anyone else in the CIA. I would look again at Angleton. I think that's because I think there were lots of forces probably that came together.
Yeah.
But I think the man in the CIA was Angleton, and he's all over these documents, and so is Israel. So whatever that means, I don't know, but it's an interesting connection.
Was Israel not mentioned previously in any of the previous file dumps?
No, not very much. In fact, there was a guy named Michael Collins Piper who wrote a book called Final Judgment back in, I guess, the 90s, maybe the 80s. And he was castigated as an anti-Semite. And I had just started communicating with him, and he died, very young. I don't know, suspiciously or not, but that tends to happen to people like that. And he was the first one that brought up, he postulated that it was Israel. I don't think Israel itself, assassinated JFK. I think our government obviously was, I believe, the main force, but Israel had some involvement. And Piper talked about what was previously unknown, and now everyone acknowledges the fact that JFK was at war with Israel at the time of the assassination with David Ben-Gurion. He'd been exchanging angry letters back and forth and angry phone calls because he was upset that Israel was developing nuclear weapons. He said, no, you're not going to do that. Absolutely not. And he was the last president, to my knowledge, to stand up to Israel. And he was assassinated shortly thereafter. Michael Collins Piper was called anti-Semitic by all my fellow researchers. I tried to get him to come on the forums and talk with us, and he was treated so badly that he didn't want to deal with it. And now you have everyone acknowledges that JFK was in a feud with David Ben-Gurion at the time of the assassination, and especially the alt-right online, many of them think Israel did it. They were the main, I don't think they were the main culprit, but there's no question they were involved. So I think he deserves credit for opening that door. And we don't know what else might have been going on that we didn't know, because he's the one that ferreted that out. But JFK had so many enemies at the time of the assassination. He was getting out of Vietnam. Obviously, the Pentagon didn't want that. Dr. Strangelove, General Curtis LeMay, I feel pretty confident he was a conspirator. And then you had Alan Dulles, who had been in the CIA and been fired by JFK after the Bay of Pigs, had every reason to hate him, and whatever involvement Israel was there, and what I was looking for, and I can't find it. Somebody sent me. People send me so much stuff, but they sent me what's called it's referred to as the JFK hit memo, and it comes from the Federal Reserve of all people, and I couldn't find it in the files. And whoever sent it to me, I put out a thing, and whoever sent this to me, nobody ever got back to me. But I know I saw it as a memo, now whether it was a fake or something, but it looked pretty official. And it talked in there about the JFK's, problematic policy, because he had printed silver certificates right before the assassination, which is the first time since Lincoln printed greenbacks that they circumvented the Federal Reserve. And we know that JFK's father was an early critic of the Federal Reserve. So I'm sure he grew up hearing a lot of bad things about the Federal Reserve, and I feel confident he knew something about their, what they really were. So I think you can throw them in, especially if we can find that memo and validate it. Because to me, it looked, I don't know if it was a smoking gun, but in so many words, it said, hey, we've got to do something about this policy. We can't let it continue. So I wish I could find it again, but so I thought I think all those forces probably kind of came together, and I think Oliver Stone had it right in his movie JFK, where he said, kind of there was something in the wind, and all these people came together in a common cause, because a lot of people wanted to get rid of JFK.
Right. I think it would be really similar to Donald Trump, especially what we saw in the first administration in 2016, when Donald Trump, you had all these forces coming together saying, we're the resistance and we're here to defy Trump and we're here to stop Trump. And there was a lot of people had a lot of different reasons why they wanted to stop Trump, but they came together in that common purpose. And so maybe there was a behind the scenes, a rumbling of a lot of people really upset with JFK for a lot of different reasons, and they all came together to resist. And the way they resisted was by offing the guy. But it does seem like Israel has, when you look at like Jack Ruby, who's Rubenstein, right? And you've got, you've got then Angleton, who looks like he was a double agent. It looks like he was a double agent. It looks like even though he was really high up in the CIA, it looks like he was also high up with Mossad.
Yeah, it certainly looks that way. And again, a guy has memorials to him in Israel. I don't know that anybody else in the CIA has a memorial. Why would he have a memorial in Israel? So you're right. And it's just kind of, common sense to look and say, okay, JFK had a feud at the time with Israel, and he was the last known president to go to war with Israel. You can see certainly Trump is in bed with Israel. He's holding chairs for Netanyahu with that.
I know. But you know what? I kind of wonder, though, because this file dropped, the fact that we see that Israel's all over this now, Trump's playing a weird game. I don't really know what he's doing when it comes to Israel. Hard to know. It's almost like he's pretending to be their friend, and then he's like backstabbing him a little bit. Even with this latest meeting with Netanyahu, he really upset Netanyahu several times, saying things like, you got to be, I like Erdogan in Turkey, and you got to be cool with them. I'm talking Iran, by the way. I'm trying to come to a peace agreement with them, and doing things that were undermining. Or Netanyahu, the purpose of his visit was to try to get the tariffs reduced, and Trump basically said, "We give you $4 billion a year. We're not budging on anything." So, he's an interesting character, because he certainly does seem to be on their side. It appears that way, but I almost feel like he's backstabbing them. It feels like he's saying, "Oh, I'm going to put on the face because that's what I have to do." But, behind your back, I'm going to completely backstab you, hopefully. Because we have to get out from this influence. And if it goes all the way back to JFK, probably prior to that, when you look at Truman and the letter bombs that they were sent, they were trying to off an American president. They were trying to terrorize an American president. They terrorized Truman, sending letter bombs. They were terrorizing the British government. That's the beginning in the history. The Israelis, I know a lot of people will say, oh, you guys are just blaming it on the Jews, right? And people will kind of go down that road. But that's not what's happening. You've got a country, I don't want to give them praise, but at the same time, to have an entire nation form from 77 years ago and be as powerful as it is today, that is an incredible accomplishment, right? That's like, how do you go from no nation to this nation now that is set up but in order to get that done, you have to be ruthless, right? You've got to be ruthless. It is not easy to set up an entire country from nothing. And so they have been able to figure out how to do it. And they used terrorism in order to get that done. And they used blackmail, and they used every weapon in their arsenal, not just guns against the Palestinian people and weapons against the Palestinians. They used every single weapon in their arsenal in order to create a nation. And that has nothing to do with, that is beside the fact of the religious orientation of the people, whether they're Jewish or not. Any nation that is going to crop up from nothing and sprout the way that it has, the way that Israel has, you're going to look at that history and it's going to be ruthless. And they have, I mean, the fact that they were sending letter bombs to Truman and then potentially were all over the JFK assassination to now holding practically every single member of our government by the balls. I mean, they just have all of them by the nuts. I don't know what they got on each of them, but they certainly do. And here we are,
Well, yeah, exactly. And if you go back even farther, with the Truman administration, the first Secretary of Defense, before that they called it Secretary of War, was James Forrestal. I talk about him a lot, and he was pushed out of a window at Bethesda Naval Hospital. I mean, they claim he jumped. He didn't jump. And, one of his he was good friends with not only old Joe Kennedy, but also a young John F. Kennedy, toured Europe with him. And he was the foremost critic in government of Israel. It had just been formed, and he told Truman, this is insane. And it was insane because you were just creating a powder keg there. You were putting people that, you created a nation state in the middle of all these warring factions, and it was bound to explode. They knew it. And yeah, Israel has been an accomplishment, but it's financed by us. I mean, I think Israel would have been destroyed a long time ago if we didn't, the taxpayers didn't make it the third most powerful military in the world. I think it's the size of Rhode Island, and it's the third most powerful military in the world. It's all courtesy of us. And, but after Forrestal died like that, I mean, just, to me, he may have been, I don't know why else would they have killed him, as far as that was his main problem at that time, was that he was criticizing Israel. And his friend Joe McCarthy, who obviously has been in American memory hole, I do what I can to try to restore his reputation. I think he's been treated unfairly, but McCarthy died in Bethesda Naval Hospital after claiming he wrote a pamphlet that they murdered Forrestal. 3 years later, I think it was, he went into Bethesda, the same hospital where they did the autopsy on JFK, age 48 with a knee issue. He was dead 2 days later. They never did an autopsy on him. That's the kind of hidden history I write about, but those things are kind of all related. I don't know whether they revolved exclusively around Israel, but you do have their hand in there. And I think that the problem is we shy away from, I'm with you. I have lots and lots of people. I tend to attract people that just want to talk about the Jews and nothing else. And I get tired of it, but you can't avoid it sometimes. And when you see the reaction, I mean, look at Ben Shapiro's reaction to these file releases, and it was so ridiculous. I think he lost whatever support he still has, and it was like a kid trying to promote the impossible idea that Oswald did it. Wink, wink, nod, nod, all the stupid stuff he was doing. But he was obviously upset because of all the references to Israel. And the guy is, he clearly is. I think I asked him once on Twitter, not that he's ever going to answer me, but I said, in the unlikely event there was a war between Israel and the United States, Ben, which side would you be on?
Oh, we know what the answer is. He's full on Israeli.
I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
So, you're finding that stuff everywhere, and I think that's why a lot of the response to this is because really, as these file releases go, I think there was more in this than in the last several ones I've seen, just because they got rid of the redactions. And I think that's why you saw these references to Israel. I think probably all those references were redacted before. They weren't now. So I don't know. Sometimes the conspiracy guy in me thinks that they want this because there's a lot of attention being paid to Israel out there now, especially among black people, Kanye West and all these people. They're openly talking about this. And, when you had the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act last year, and it's like, if you want to try to convince people that you're nuts or haters for saying the Jews run the world, the last thing you ought to do is create legislation that tries to prosecute people for saying that. Doesn't that kind of prove their point?
Yeah, it totally does. I think that that's why I'm wondering what Trump's ultimate plan is. The fact that they released these files and they did it in a way where they allowed Israel to be all over it. I mean, the Trump administration knows that even on the right, there is a huge debate on the right about Israel. I mean, you've got the Tim Pools and the Ben Shapiros of the world who are supporting Israel, right? And the Bonginos who support Israel. But then you've got a lot of people on the right that are like Tucker, who's a little bit more, he's kind of neutral, but he's at least more critical somewhat, willing to ask questions. You've got a lot of people out there, Rogan putting people on, asking questions. You've got all these bigger, and Candace Owens obviously out there just blatantly saying, Israel's a problem. You got a lot of that. And so even on the right, there's a lot of fighting about Israel. And I think the administration, if you're going to do it right, and if you're going to try to get rid of this influence. If you can see, if you're seeing that, yeah, Israel had a hand in the assassination of a sitting American president, that Israel sent letter bombs to another American sitting president and has controlled us and basically has bought off the entire government. When you see that they have that level of control over our government, and if your goal is to unravel that control, how are you going to do it? You can't just do it because you're going to get assassinated. They got a blackmail operation, right? They got a lot of power. So the way you would do it is you would allow the American people to do it, right? I mean, you'd get the American people to do it. You'd get the American people to say, we've had it, and we will no longer vote for anybody who continues to fund Israel, who continues to take money from AIPAC. Like, we will not support any of these politicians. And you're starting to finally see that change in the weather, with the American people. You're starting to get people saying, no more. We don't want this. You've got Thomas Massie out there saying, I don't take any money from AIPAC.
Yes.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's also willing to criticize Israel. She doesn't take money from them either. And so you've got people that are going in that direction. And so if I were trying to unravel it, I would give the people more like fuel. And this JFK drop was a bit more fuel so that, Trump could shake Netanyahu's hand, pull out his chair, pretend like he's still friends with Israel. But the American people are chomping at the bit saying, no, get rid of this. This is not what we want. This is not America first. We don't want this influence on our government. They're killing our presidents. They're controlling our government. They're putting us in these endless Middle Eastern wars we don't want to be in. We want out. And I think that shift is happening, but you've got to continue dropping these types of nuggets to the people so that they realize how much influence there actually is by this foreign Middle Eastern tiny country. So I kind of wonder.
And you're right. You brought up Massey. I wrote a Substack about that last year when what did they expect people to think when he was the first member of Congress I knew that said, I won't let AIPAC in my office. And he'd say, they can't come in my office. And literally, he said it on Tucker Carlson, very big interview, probably a couple million people watched it, I guess. And right after that, his wife died. Suspiciously out of nowhere. I still haven't been able to find out what the cause was, but they had been on vacation with their grandkids the week before. So it was, and she was like 51 or something. And doesn't appear to have slowed him down. He's just as critical as ever of Israel. It's so good. He's a wonderful man. I think if there's any hope in Congress, it's him. He's by far the best. And then, of course, what do you have Trump doing? Trump picking a fight with him and saying he's not going to support him while endorsing Lindsey Graham again. So that's why I call it the Trumpenstein Project. You cannot figure the guy out.
No, I mean, he could say things like, "Yeah, I don't support Massey just to keep placate the Israel lobby." But at the end of the day, if he doesn't actually, that who cares? Like, he called little Marco, what did he say about Marco Rubio over and over? And now he's the Secretary of State. So Trump can play that game where he's like against you one minute and then just kind of ignoring you the next. And he probably knows Thomas Massie will win his reelection, and there's no stopping that. But so why not just kind of throw a bone to your, to AIPAC to make them think, oh no, I'm still on your side. See, but it's all a facade. I don't think Trump's really I don't think he's really on their side. I think he's like, I have to play this. I don't know. That's my feeling, because the guy is so mercurial. I can't figure out, and the only thing I can think of is, I think this is one of those like mean girl tactics where in school they pretend like they're your best friend. They get a locker right next to yours.
Trump would be a good mean girl. Trump would be a great mean girl.
Oh gosh.
I can't figure. I write about him so much, and it's impossible to figure out. And I've been working on a book about Trump for a while now, and it just, first of all, it's a never-ending story, so I can't end it. When he became president the second time, I said, oh God, I got 4 more years to wait now, because and you don't know what the next act is. You don't know what so who knows? I mean, I'm just sitting here hoping he gets rid of the IRS and all the other things he claimed he was going to do.
Oh, I know it, right? Why do all these tariffs that we're still going to be paying income tax? Like, at least alleviate the income tax on the American people if you're going to be starting to put tariffs on us, because we have to pay the tariffs, not really the foreign countries. You can't tax a foreign country. It's just that if we want to import foreign goods, we're going to have to pay those tariffs. So we're getting doubly taxed now. So get rid of the income tax. Fine. Let's do it.
No, and you have to also have, if you're going to have tariffs, that's fine. I support that, because we have to try to protect our industry, but we don't have any industry. So first of all, you have to bring the industry for you have to make something of something before. What's the point of putting a 500 whatever the tariff he's supposedly putting on China? We haven't made electronics, I think, since Zenith went out of business in the United States. So we you have to have some domestic competition, or as you say, it will just result in higher prices for consumers, and he's going to lose support.
Right. I mean, if we're still paying income taxes and all of the price of goods go up with inflation, with the tariffs, then we're all just paying a lot of money out. But, I think his gamble is maybe this will bring the manufacturing back. I mean, we can't, like you said, we have to have the manufacturing here if we're going to be doing the tariffs. So, but you've got to get it here. And maybe the way to get it here is to basically strong arm these companies to come back and say, you got to come back or we're slapping massive tariffs on you. So bring it back to American shore.
I hope so. I hope there's a method to his madness, but he's trying to figure Trump out. And I'm a Trump agnostic, we're like the smallest minority group in the world. So
I'm with you. I'm a Trump agnostic also. I want him to succeed. He's the president. I absolutely want him to succeed. And I'm willing to see where this goes. I mean, to me, I'm like, hey, we never tried this tactic, so why don't we try it? Like, we can't continue on the way we were. So, and any change is going to jolt people. People don't like change fundamentally. It's just the way human nature is, even on the smallest things. So, I know that everything's going to always cause a jolt when you make a big change, but we just have to wait and see how it pans out. And maybe he's right on the tariffs. It's a huge gamble. I hope he's right, because he's either going to come out a huge hero or he's going to come out like, this is going to crucify him. It's one or the other.
Yeah, well, I'm like you. I'm rooting for him, and I'm never going to be one. I don't hate or love him. I just, I don't understand people that get so passionate either way. That I of course, I mean, like RFK Jr. I'm a little smitten with him because I'm a Kennedy fanboy, and I'm disappointed with what he's been saying about measles vaccines and stuff. I don't know what he's doing because I had a very high opinion of him, and he seems to be saying something different than he's said for many years.
Yeah.
So I hope it turns around. But that was the best thing about the Trump administration to me, was having RFK Jr. in there. And I have to think he was probably instrumental in pushing Trump to make sure the file releases, came, and also to Representative Luna. Probably, I don't know if RFK Jr. had an impact on that or not, but that was another interesting thing that we've seen at the same time. It may not have been much, but just to see Congress even looking at it, and Representative Luna, she's very young. She obviously is just learning about this, but I give her a lot of credit for holding the hearings and at least attempting to focus a little light on it.
Yeah. RFK Jr. is, he's obviously, also really in bed with Israel, right? But you got to think, if you know that they've been, like we just mentioned, offing American presidents, threatening other American presidents, blackmailing everybody, and you're in a position like him, I mean, if they were going to blackmail me, there's like one really easy way. And it's not about sex tapes and Epstein Island. I mean, yes, RFK Jr. was on the Epstein plane a couple of times, so there is some suspicion there. But if you threaten someone's kids, I think that'll make anybody suddenly be like, here's the Israeli flag, I'm waving it. Like, don't kill my kids. You killed my dad, you killed my uncle, don't kill my kid. You killed maybe maybe other members of my family. So just don't kill my kids. I'm waving the Israeli flag. Shmuley, here we go. Like,
exactly. I think that explains Rabbi Shmuley, because RFK, I don't remember him talking about Israel. You can tell when he talks about Israel that he's not being sincere.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it. He's a Catholic. He's not even one of those, like, the Catholics are not dispensationalists. They're not sitting there like, oh, Jesus has to come, in order for Jesus to come back, this is what we got to get all the Jews to Jerusalem. Catholics don't believe that. So they believe that it's about the church, so it's a very bizarre, why he's, except for the only thing I can think of is either blackmail, but I don't know if he cares about blackmail on him.
Well, no.
It depends on what it is, I guess.
It's kind of disappeared, but for a couple of days there, they were talking about supposedly they had something on him with the reporter, the sexting thing.
So what? That's like two consenting adults, unless it's two consenting. So okay, he cheated on his wife again. Like, okay, that's not news, right? He's been doing that forever. So no one's that's gonna be like, well, it's Cheryl's fault for marrying the guy. I mean, quite honestly, I would have never married the guy with his history the way that he is. You can expect that once a cheater, always a cheater. But so that's nothing, that part. Okay, so what? Release the sex tape. Let's see it. Who cares?
Well, yeah, I would like to know, because that was in the news for a couple of days, and then it kind of disappeared. And
it'd have to be something illegal, like rape or like a child. I mean, in order for it to be real blackmail, it's got to be Epstein level, like you were sleeping with a 12-year-old kind of a thing. Not like, oh, you cheated on your wife again.
No, yeah, that would, and especially because the perception most people have of the Kennedys, which I think a lot of it's unfair. But an American Memory Hole, I
don't know if it's unfair, Don. I think it's pretty documented, and they were sleeping with everybody.
But I think it is. But I think it's like if you look at JFK, for instance, I said, and I don't know. First of all, you're sleeping with Marilyn Monroe. It's not like that's an equal relationship at least. She was arguably a bigger figure than him, so he wasn't pressuring anybody like Bill Clinton, Paula Jones, and people that where he was using his power. As JFK was sleeping with movie stars, but on the same time with the Kennedy propaganda, you have at the same time they're telling you that he was too sick to be president. He was on the verge of death all the time. That they covered up his Addison's disease, so he was very sickly according to them, kept alive by drugs allegedly, and yet he was having nonstop sex. So how does that work? How can you be deadly sick and also be having sex with movie stars? I mean, so again, I think a lot of it, and so much of it came from Judith Campbell Exner. I've gone over this in my writing. I think I'm the only one that does it. Where I don't believe her story. I never have believed. You look at her original press conference, you see how ridiculous she was, showing up with huge, oversized sunglasses and a giant hat, and just never mentioned the mafia at all in her early things. But it goes into, I think, a general slur against the Kennedys. But certainly, yeah, I can acknowledge they probably have a lot of women throwing themselves at them, and they clearly like them. So I mean, it's not the worst. It's not the worst sin, in my opinion. Considering some of the stuff these other people do, but in RFK Jr.'s case, he had a diary, and I talked about this in American Memory Hole. I had excerpts from it in there where it was released to the New York Post. It was leaked to the New York Post by his ex-wife, who was found hanged in a barn shortly thereafter that. Now, I don't think RFK Jr. killed her, but I think it's again that death is around these people.
Yeah,
and it's constant. Even right before during COVID, his niece was died in the Chesapeake Bay with her 8-year-old son. The story was they chased a kickball. Really, that wealthy family went into the choppy waters of the Chesapeake Bay to chase a kickball? Mm-hmm. $1.99 kickball, and you took your 8-year-old with you? That's what they came. And she just happened to be the director of a global health initiative funded by the Gates Foundation. Right after that, I don't think it's any accident. Literally almost the next day, that's when RFK Jr. started going after Bill Gates with a fury. He had never done that before. So I have to think those two are connected. So I think he knows a lot of this stuff. And I don't know what kind of gun they have to his head now. But, there's just been so many things associated with that family. And so, yeah, if they're threatening his kids, I can understand that. But
that's what I would think. I mean, of course, I don't have any evidence that they're threatening his kids or anything. But I just think, what would make... And it's a question I think we see over and over and over again. Like Tulsi Gabbard, for example, is like another good example of this, where, she had been critical of Israel in the past and their treatment of the Palestinians and their mowing the lawn in Gaza, only to now be all in on Israel, right? And it's like, what causes people to flip like this? I would never be able to just get into office and flip my narrative. The only things I could think of that if it doesn't involve some sort of coercion, like blackmail or threats, that it would be, look, you've got a pet project that you really, that's really important to you. And like Elon Musk is a good example of this. We all know what his pet project is, right? Mars. The guy's obsessed with building out and colonizing Mars. So if you've got that and that is your dream, that's your number one dream, you're willing to compromise and do things and say things on other things in order to continue pursuing your big dream. So if that is, he's got to, for example, keep some government secrets because he needs access to the space to be able to shoot rockets up into the air. He's got to be able, so he's got to get in with the U.S. government and be, okay, I agree, I'll keep certain things secret and classified, or I'll, manufacture some weapons for you, whatever it is, right? He's got to do some things on that end. And also, like when it comes to Israel, and he's now, he made his pilgrimage to Israel, and to Jerusalem, and now he's come back full on. And that's, again, if your goal, you say, okay, I'll just compromise on this thing because it's not that important to me. But this other thing is really important to me, and I don't want to compromise that thing that's important to me. So I'll go along with these other things. so that I could continue pursuing my dream. That's the only other thing that I can think of, is that it's for personal benefit of some other goal. And, whether that be power and continuing to stay in politics, like professional gain, whether it be the gain of a dream, like what Elon Musk and Mars or something. That's the only other thing I could think of if it's not going to be coercive in nature.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And we can, I certainly try to cut people slack if people threaten my kids. I mean, obviously, I don't know that any political principle is worth that, to risk that. And so I understand. Tulsi Gabbard doesn't have any kids, I don't
think.
But,
right. No, I think in her case, I think it's been career climbing. It's been the dream of climbing the career. She has compromised, and it's not just on Israel. She's compromised on she's flip-flopped a ton on a lot of different stances in order to further her political career. And that's been really, for me, very disappointing to see. I like Thomas Massey's. I want to see a Thomas Massey, and even RFK Jr. I told Tulsi Gabbard at one point, when I was on speaking terms with her, I don't talk to her at all anymore, but I told her at one point, you should become a Republican. It was after she left. She got crapped on by the Democrats, and I just said, why are you even sticking around? I said the same thing to Bobby Kennedy, too. I was like, why are you running as a Democrat? Just go to the Republican side. They both looked at me like, what are you talking about? But when the way Robert F. Kennedy Jr. did it was the way I hoped Tulsi would do it. My talking to her was, look, Republicans right now don't know who they are or what they are. They're like, they're trying to figure it out, and they're really malleable right now. So if you go over there with your ideas, I think that a lot of Republicans would like your ideas. And I think you'd find a home in the Republican Party, whereas Democrats are just shunning you and calling you an Assad apologist. Same thing and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was the same thing. Like, look, go over to the Republican side. They'll embrace you. I tell you, they'll embrace you. And they did. But he didn't have to compromise on his, he came in and said, Maha movement, this is what I'm all about. And Republicans embraced him. Tulsi, when she went over to the Republican side, started to change into a Republican. Like, she changed into a regular rhino. And it was like, you don't need to do that, actually. You can actually go over there with your values, and they'll like you the way you are.
Yeah, you're right, and that's been the thing about what I call the Trump phenomenon, is that it hasn't other than RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, Democrats like that coming across the aisle and being the best thing about his administration. I think it's great to see, and maybe we'll see more. Maybe he'll reach out to Cynthia McKinney and Cindy Sheehan, my friends, but I doubt that. But I mean, I would love to see that. But if they get absorbed into the rhino establishment, and that's what Trump just vacillates back and forth, and you're really not sure. He kind of tells everybody what they want. He still throws red meat to the MAGA crowd. Yeah. And that's good. You have to keep them there, but he has to actually get these things done. And I think he's finding out you can't govern, exclusively by executive order. And with the Congress he has, even though there's a majority, he doesn't have anywhere near the majority. Even the Freedom Caucus crowd, they're not all great. They're not all like, Thomas Massey. And the regular Republicans are hopeless. So I don't know what the stuff he's trying to get done. Imagine if he had a bill there to abolish the IRS. I mean, it'd probably get Thomas Massey's vote. I don't know if anybody else would even vote for it. Yeah. But, that's the kind of thing that you do need Congress for that. And that's why it was after Trump was elected the first time, I said, in the midterm elections, I said, you're seeing very few Trump style candidates. Even the ones that call themselves that are not really full of that fiery rhetoric. They're not talking about it. And a lot of them have been absorbed into the rhino establishment. And as you noted, they tend to be pro-Israel, which Trump is too. And so they're not going to rock the boat on foreign policy. And that's why it was so distressing to see, right after these JFK file releases, not only did Trump give an interview where he said I've always thought Oswald acted alone. I said, what? 99.9% of your base thinks you're an idiot for saying that. Why are you saying? I know he doesn't believe it. Roger Stone, called me. He was the first person to like my first book, Hidden History, and ended up writing a foreword to it, the paperback version. And we had a conversation on the phone where Trump was just beginning to enter politics. And we said, I've known Trump for 30 years. You would love this guy. He knows all about the conspiracies. He would love your book. And I think, okay, so I think he does, because he references them all the time. But then he capitulates and makes it, a statement like that, which he didn't need to do. I don't know why he does that. But, so you have that kind of dichotomy between what his base is and what he is. And then you need to have real America First candidates coming in really by now, with as long as Trump has been, on the scene, 8 years, you think that at least half the Republicans would be diehard American first kind of people.
Yeah, you'd think.
They're not.
Right.
And that's the thing. He doesn't
There is real first. Still.
Yeah. So we're not seeing the coattails that he should have had to see some real, because the Republicans now have a chance to change into the populist type party. And there's some of them in there, the Massey types, but they're just some awful rhinos that are still there. And it's just, they're not much of an alternative.
Yeah. Donald Jeffries, this has been such a fun, interesting conversation, and you've shed some light on what these documents, the JFK document dumps, have, the some of the significant new information that we've gained, which is really great.
One more.
Yeah.
One more, if I mention, you might be interested. And again, it's kind of off topic, but it's fascinating. And I wrote about this in American Memory Hole. There was an urban legend that JFK Jr. had sent a threatening letter to then Senator Joe Biden in 1994, calling him a traitor. And we all just said, that doesn't make any sense. There's a memo in there, and it doesn't explain it. There's no context. But apparently he did, or they say he sent some kind of threatening letter to Joe Biden. I don't know why he was calling him a traitor, but I thought that was fascinating that they mentioned that. It's like, wow, that's, I don't know what it means, but especially in light of what later happened to JFK Jr.
Well, Joe Biden, one of the most sinister in the entire government. I mean, that guy... Talk about doing everything that your master tells you so that you could one day be president. I mean, that's... And they finally let him be president, but only when he was so old that he couldn't even think for himself, and they had to control, and then they got to control him completely. But he gets to go down in the history books. Donald Jeffries, author of many books, including American Memory Hole, How the Court Historians Promote Disinformation. We do have the link down below to that book, as well as to your Substack and to your X account, which I think, and is there anywhere else you want us to send people?
That's the primary places, because I'm shadow banned pretty much everywhere. But Substack is great; it's a free speech platform, so people can subscribe to me there. That's the best way to support me.
Great, thank you so much, Don.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iversen Show, which you could catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, by going to KimIversonShow.com. You'll catch it live. It is free to watch. 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. See you there.